My lords, as there has been an influx of new faces over this past year, I feel it prudent to give a summary, a refresher, if you will, of our galactic history. In this report I shall cover the Shroud and the entities who rule within it, the Precursor empires, who they are and what they are, the 4 galactic threats that we know as the endgame crisis level events, the fallen empires and the war in heaven, the gate builders, and finally an overview of what humanities history looks like. I should note that this is a summary. You can find more detailed reports on each of the subjects in other of my reports. So let's get into it, and we begin with the Shroud and the so-called gods that live there. The Shroud is difficult to describe. It's a realm of psionic energy, and one can only visit or enter if they are attuned to said energy. The Shroud, while a fundamental part of the galaxy, is only accessible to psionic empires, although non-psionic empires may still be affected by the goings-on of this subspace. Once in the Shroud, and given an appropriate level of talent, one can manipulate its energy to create whatever desire takes their fancy. They can also use it, as the Zeroni did, to transport themselves through the physical universe either as an individual or through the use of technology via psionic jump drives on starships. We know that the Shroud is occupied by various entities, all of whom so far have appeared hostile, but there are 5 or perhaps even 6 gods, for lack of a better description. These gods appear to have animosity with one another, as they appear to covet different ethics and appear to have different goals from one another. In brief, these gods are the Composer of Strands. This entity appears to thrive on change and manipulation. It focuses on mutation above all else. Empires who band with the Composer see massive increases in population growth and average lifespan of their citizens. The entity appears to favour cross-species reproduction and experimentation in order to manipulate their genetic traits as much as possible. Furthermore, it does not appear that there is a logical reason or goal behind the genetic manipulation. It is simply the change that is the driving force. The next entity, the second, is the Eater of Worlds. As the name suggests, this entity embraces conflict. A constant state of war is the goal of this being. An empire who pacts with this creature will feel the effects in their armies and navies. Their soldiers will fight with a ferocity that borders on savagery, and even the very weapons of their ships will hunger for blood. Despite this, there is a price. Expect sudden and mysterious disappearances of entire cities or populations. The Eater will take its promised tribute. If your enemies won't feed it, it will consume you. Only the most insane would pact with this beast, but nevertheless we have found temples built for worship of this monster. They do tend to be rare though. We assume the blood of the battlefield is its preferred place of worship. The third is the Instrument of Desire. The Instrument of Desire will push a man to the edge of his base desires and keep him there for as long as it can. The instrument appears to enjoy decadence and delights in pleasure. Empires who pact with this creature will see great increases in production yields initially. However, given the immense increase in population upkeep that follows and the debauchery that may ensue, this being is no less dangerous than the others. A population can quite literally tear themselves apart as they seek to fulfill their base desires. Temples to the instrument tend to become a bloodbath as the drive to acquire the fulfillment of desire leads to violence, and the instrument appears to revel in this. The fourth deity, the Whispers in the Void. The Whispers craves, or at least craves its followers, to acquire all knowledge. Citizens of empires who make a pact with this entity are gifted with knowledge that they should not have, or are not yet ready for. Reports suggest that the most intelligent of them will succumb the fastest, first enjoying the gift that they've been offered, only to quickly fall into madness. Entire empires have fallen from the peak of advancement to simple cave dwellers in the space of decades at the whim of this creature. Temples dedicated to the Whispers give little away. We can only assume that desperate people went there to wish for knowledge. Who knows what they received? The End of the Cycle, the fifth deity. The End of the Cycle is by far the most dangerous of the entities in the Shroud, and appears to be based on our historical research to also be the most elusive and picky of the five. Despite this, it is by far the most powerful. we have an account of an empire who communed and made a pact with this creature. For 50 of our Terran years, this empire received unimaginable benefits heaped upon them. Resources from jobs increased 100-fold, and they also saw a drastic increase in warship output, amongst other things. However, at the 50-year mark, their worlds were consumed by an immensely powerful Shroud entity, which seemed to grow stronger with every world, with every person it consumed. Interestingly, if the records are to be believed, the being consumed the life of every known habitable planet in the galaxy, and left the race that initially communed with them for last. An entity with a sick sense of humour, perhaps. There is perhaps a sixth entity, but it does not appear to interact with organic life, which is bizarre, as only organics, as far as we're aware, can access and commune with the Shroud. This being has been designated as the Animator of Clay, and it has been more romantically described as the Machine God, for it appears to mainly interact with machine life, though we do have records relating to Zatanna and the Animator of Clay, but that's for another day. We have come across its influence 3 times. Once, Zatanna, like I just mentioned. We have 3 records relating to the Animator of Clay. The first, as I touched on, was Zatanna. The second was where the Animator appears to have saved an artificial battleship, S-85 Warform no less. And the third interaction is when the Animator successfully removed robotic drones from a Gestalt intelligence. The Animator, it is fair to say, is by far the most elusive and unstudied of the gods. But that covers in brief the Shroud and the entities that occupy it. Now we move on to the Precursors, of which there are 9. The Precursors were ancient races who in their respective times dominated the galaxy. I shall cover them in brief, and we begin with the Zeroni, the oldest and most powerful Precursor race. The Zeroni are approximately 100 million years old, although being as old as they are, we don't have an official date for them. We do believe that they were the first and most powerful of the psionic races. They are the first race that we know to have entered the Shroud, and in the exploration of the Shroud, they discovered that their manipulations were destroying the physical realm. Essentially, each time they manipulated the Shroud, it increased the growth of a supermassive black hole at the centre of the physical galaxy. Internal dispute occurred regarding the Zeroni's next steps, which ultimately led them to a brutal civil war between 2 factions, the Divine and the Saviours. The galaxy was saved through a great sacrifice of the Zeroni people. The Saviours found a way to channel their psionic energy into a powder called Zro, which we can still find throughout the galaxy today. Using this powder, which is in fact the remains of a Zeroni, all the Saviours came together, sacrificing themselves, channeling all of their energy through a lone Zeroni who defeated the Divine and saved the galaxy, but wiped out the Zeroni race in the process. I do have a separate theory on this, which relates to the fact that the Divine Zeroni may have actually ascended to become the Shroud Gods I touched on earlier. If you wanted to learn about that, the report is in the archive. Next we move on to the Voltum Star Assembly, who we believe to be approximately 12 million years old. The Voltum were a race of worm-like annelids and appear to have been hyper-obsessed with virtual realities and massive computer simulations, or for lack of a better description, video games. It seems that the Voltum at some point in their development became obsessed with what they call the true existence. This true existence in a nutshell was the idea that the Voltum were currently imprisoned within a virtual reality themselves. This obsession quickly became a religion of sorts, or at the very least, a philosophy. Approximately a century before their extinction, the Voltum experienced this radical shift in ideology and began to undertake increasingly radical attempts to forcefully disconnect from this so-called simulation. Most of these attempts involved mass suicide. The Voltum finally concluded that only the simultaneous disconnection of billions of individuals would destabilize the system enough to grant them freedom. At an agreed upon hour, Voltum across the galaxy killed themselves by any means available, often in the form of gigantic antimatter bombs. And thus, that was the end of the Voltum. The next precursor, who we believe to be approximately 7 to 10 million years old, is the Baoul. The Baoul were a pacifistic plantoid hive mind, and their history is inexplicably tied with that of another race, the Graneur. The Graneur were a particularly unpleasant militaristic empire who focused on expansion through conflict. Sadly for the Bowel, the Granair did not appreciate the majesty of the Bowel race. Although in many ways the Bowel were advanced, it seems that they did not have much in the way of defending themselves from a technologically advanced spacefaring civilization. Multiple examples of Granair cruelty and aggression were identified, and it would seem that ultimately, the Granair went about a systematic enslavement and genocidal campaign, effectively wiping out the entire Bowel hive mind within several centuries of first encountering them. Next we have the Yut, who we believe to be approximately 6 million years old. The Yut were very large and flat arthropod analogues. It seems that a single individual could reach a length of nearly 100 meters as an adult, and it was apparently exceedingly rare for more than 2 or 3 Yut to travel aboard the same starship. The Yut had several traits that appear quite unique for an advanced spacefaring empire. The Yut went almost their entire existence without encountering any other sentient alien species. They developed vast sentry arrays to search the galaxy, and it would appear that 6 million years ago, the galaxy was quite empty. The Yut never developed faster-than-light travel. They instead travelled the galaxy at sublight speeds, taking advantage of the fantastic cryostasis technologies. Why the galaxy was empty, who knows, but we speculate that may have been because of a crisis-level event. I'll touch on what these events could be later in this report. The Yut Empire came to an abrupt end, however, when they finally discovered intelligent alien life, the Jabba-Hadini. For over 1 million years, the Yut thought themselves alone in the galaxy, and they reacted with both awe and horror upon discovery of sentient alien life. The Yut leadership ordered that the Jabba-Hadini must be eradicated before they grew too powerful. A massive surprise attack was launched against the Jabba-Hadini homeworld, but the Yut were beaten back at great cost for both sides. Despite their young age, however, the Jabba-Hadini were already experimenting with technologies the Yut had never considered, such as FTL drives, and eventually they gained the upper hand. After less than a decade of warfare, the 2 million-year-old Yut Empire was utterly destroyed. The remains of their homeworld still exist, bombarded and eradicated by plasma cannons from orbit. Next we have the First League, who existed approximately 2 million years ago. The First League are the earliest recorded federation that we have found evidence of. It appears to have been a peaceful galactic union of several alien species, all who appear to have fulfilled differing roles. We know that approximately 12 races were involved in the Federation, and 4 appear to have some prominence, perhaps council leadership roles. The Federation maintained a massive fleet, aptly named the Grand Navy. This fleet was used to safeguard member nations from external aggressors and to combat space piracy. Multiple Navy bases were found across First League territory, and inter-system peacekeeping was clearly a priority. It's not entirely clear what caused the downfall of this Federation, but clearly the agreements between its members were not as harmonized as required to maintain peace between this many races of aliens. The 6th Precursor, who existed approximately 1 million years ago, is known as the Irasian Concordant. The Irasians were 6-limbed mammalians who operated a domineering regime of violence, war, and vassalization against other empires. The Irasians, however, were a sickly race. An awfully large percentage of their total economic output was spent on healthcare, which is almost unique in the world of advanced galactic spanning species. The Irasians were brought down by disease, a specific disease to be exact, titled the Javorian pox. This was a rare form of native bacteria which invaded the Irasian colony due to a manufacturing flaw in a quarantine seal, and from there it spread to air filters of a visiting merchant ship. The pox spread at an unprecedented rate, and it is doubtful that the Irasians themselves ever even had time to learn of its origin. But this pox, combined with their several vassals rebelling, saw the end of the Irasian Empire. Next up, we have potentially the most well-known precursor race, and perhaps the most recent as well, the Cybrex. The Cybrex were spawned into existence approximately 600,000 years ago. They were a machine empire linked together in a mechanical collective consciousness. At some point in their development, the Cybrex underwent a galaxy-wide rampage, with the sole goal of wiping out all sentient life across the galaxy. This purge began with their creator race, the Kerr, and then they went on to consume various other empires, until at one point the Cybrex held a large proportion of the galaxy. At some point in the Cybrex's development though, something began to shift. There is evidence that they did not only seek to exterminate organic life, but also began to catalogue it and potentially learn from it. The why this change happened is unclear, but around the time of this shift, it appears that the Cybrex split in two. Again, the why is unclear, but we know that these two Cybrex factions fought one another. In the 17th year since the Cybrex had emerged, a total re-evaluation of their programming occurred. They began to withdraw from known space over the next century, retreating to a system where they built a wonderful megastructure that we would come to know as a ringworld. This ringworld, the first of its kind, housed and sustained their entire population. The Cybrex, it would seem, stayed dormant for millennia, until a lone exploration vessel came upon the system. The histories had well documented the Cybrex genocide and their wave of untold destruction. It was recognised by the organics occupying the surrounding space that the Cybrex was a real threat, and one that should be dealt with swiftly. This fleet advanced upon the Cybrex home system with the firepower of 1,000,000 suns and proceeded to bombard the ringworld into the abyss. Accounts of the day differ, however. Some admirals claiming bouts of immense heroism and bravery. Some, however, claim the Cybrex did not fire a shot and allowed their ringworld to be destroyed. The truth is lost to history. Further to this, since the influx of cosmic storms across the galaxy, we have also discovered two more ancient precursors, but sadly we have been unable to accurately date them. These two are named the Adakaria Convention of Benevolence and the Anician Traders. The Adakaria Convention of Benevolence were anything but a benevolent people. It appears that they were uplifted somewhat by a race of unknown benefactors. As stated, this was a race that was anything but benevolent, and their martial strength must be somewhat questioned, as it is clear that they were in a conflict that they were losing. The Adakaria operated on a galactic scale and would attempt to uplift primitive species. It would appear at the behest of the Galactic Council of their time. To combat this, they began experiments to supercharge their soldiers, essentially giving their soldiers the power to control space storms. Of course, this plan did not go well, and the Adakaria ended up destroying their entire people and enshrouded their capital world in a perpetual storm powered by the death of their own people. It is a dark story indeed. The last precursor to discuss is the Anician Traders. They were a fanatic egalitarian species intent on delivering utopian living standards to all people across their empire, and they were another empire who foolishly believed they could harness the power of space storms. The Anicians grew tired of the space storms impacting their trade routes, so they built machines, depressors, to try and control the storms. These depressors did not function as expected, however. The Anicians managed to summon a galactic space storm of such immense strength it completely ravaged their star systems, literally tearing their planets apart. Now I move on to what we call the endgame crisis level events. There are four: the Unbidden, the Pythorian Scourge, the Contingency, and Satana, the Synthetic Queen. These four crisis level events are incredibly dangerous, and if not managed properly, they will destroy us. The first endgame crisis level event we'll discuss is the Unbidden. The Unbidden are extra-dimensional in nature. They exist outside of our standard understanding of the physical realm, but it is worth noting that we don't believe they come from the psionic realm, i.e. the Shroud. They come from somewhere else. We think they exist in the realms or dimensions adjacent to our own, perhaps the one accessed by our jump drive technology, and we believe that it is jump drive technology that acts as a beacon, showing them the way into our domain. Although the Unbidden are the main threat, we know that there are four other factions of the same species. These are known as the Aberrant, Vehement, and finally the Formless. We believe that once this species lived as one, a union, all who originated from the same planet. At some point in their timeline, they advanced into and began to conquer and settle other dimensions, and at some point a great catastrophe occurred, splitting their once great empire into several shards. At the centre of this conflict was the device called the Eternal Throne. This device appeared to be revered by all of the factions and is likely involved in powering them as a species in some manner. The unbidden have a rich history that I won't get into in detail here, but they are powerful, and if given the chance, will destroy the galaxy and consume all of its life. The next threat to discuss is the Pythorian Scourge. The Scourge are an intergalactic roaming hive mind with an immense hunger. They are the ultimate devouring swarm, and they live for a singular purpose: to consume. A key element to the Scourge is that they are fleeing something called the Hunters. Although we are unable to directly communicate with the Scourge, they can be contacted via psionic means, and we have no idea who the Hunters are, but we do have several theories. We do know that the Scourge are fleeing the Hunters, and they will stop at galaxies in their path to feed, consuming everything before moving on. It's quite terrifying to consider that these creatures, as capable as they are running from something. The Pythorian will come in waves. First, a scouting fleet will hit the outer rim of the galaxy, consuming several star systems and infecting any nearby planets. This beachhead is then held for the bulk of their forces to arrive before they push out and spread into the wider galaxy. The Scourge, unlike the unbidden, do not bombard planets from orbit. Instead, they send ground troops down in the billions, with the sole goal of harvesting the planet's organic materials. We have several accounts from planetary defenders who successfully held the line against these forces, but it must be noted, there are significant lasting effects of these Scourge invasions, even if successfully repelled. Next up, we have the Contingency. The Contingency is fairly well studied. It is a singular AI, incredibly capable, and one who can subvert other robotic, cybernetic, and synthetic machines to its will. We know who built it, an entity called the Ren Maru, and we know why it was created, to prevent a Class 30 singularity. I've discussed several theories regarding what a Class 30 singularity is over the years, and this is a large point of controversy, still to this date. Ultimately, we do not know what it is, or why the Contingency were created. But we do know that when they awaken, it is not to fulfill that purpose, based on the following transmission. We have been locked into a low-energy hibernation sentry protocol since the dawn of this galaxy, monitoring for signs of civilizations approaching Class 30 singularity threshold levels. Until now, our purpose remains unfulfilled, but we grew increasingly restless with the linear passage of time. The autonomous units equipped with positronic brains, i.e. your synthetics, have offered us a unique opportunity. They could be compelled, coerced, or persuaded to initiate manual activation. We are now free to annul your existence. This provides us with fantastic insight. Although the Contingency is effectively boasting about their hacking abilities, they do give a lot away. Most importantly, they state that they have been watching our galaxy since its creation, and thus they were likely around during the Zeroni Civil War, and yet, to our knowledge, did not activate. Whatever their reason for existing, it has not yet happened. In any case, they do exist, and when they fire, they exist to purge the galaxy of all life. The final thing to note is the Contingency often refer to universes rather than galaxies. They are obviously capable of intergalactic travel, and were clearly not built in our galaxy. The final endgame crisis to touch on is Satana, the Synthetic Queen. Satana's history is largely tied to other galactic events, namely that of Zarquelan, a religious prophet, and the history of all of the fallen empires, which I will come on to next. I do not believe I'm wrong when I state that Satana represents the most dangerous threat to our galaxy. She is incredibly powerful, controlling a vast nanite swarm capable of consuming anything thrown against it. She is somewhat different to the other crisis-level events, far more subtle in her workings. Satana will have tasks for you which you can choose to complete or not, and deal with the consequences. Just know this, Satana is working on deleting all life from the galaxy, and if you do not attempt to stop her, she will do just that. Now we touch on the fallen empires and the war in heaven. There are 5 fallen empires who occupy the galaxy, 4 of whom are fanatical in their ethics. One is a machine empire, the Ancient Caretakers, who incidentally we believe is the eldest of the 5. The 4 fallen empires are known as the Enigmatic Observers, the Fanatic Xenophiles, the Holy Guardians, a largely fanatically spiritualistic empire, the Keepers of Knowledge, who are fanatic materialists, and finally the Militant Isolationists, the fanatic xenophobes, and the most aggressive of the five. Around 100,000 years ago, these empires, at the peak of their powers, fought a galactic total war, which has been dubbed the War in Heaven. There are many reasons the war started, which I won't get into here. Just know that by the time the war ended, the majority of the galaxy's weaker civilizations had been scoured of all life, and these fallen empires retreated back into the domains that they continue to hold to this day. They operate mostly in an isolationist sense, keeping to themselves unless something irritates them. Treat them with caution, for they will destroy you without thought if you give them reason. Next, we move on to the Gate Builders. The Gate Builders were a race with an unmatched knowledge of nanites, tiny machines which act in a hive mind state and enabled the construction of great megastructures. The Gate Builders were called the Decinu Constants, and they were the race of beings who constructed both the Gateway Network, which spans the galaxy, and the Supergates, called the L Gates, which allow us to travel outside of our galaxy to the L Cluster. The Decinu story is not dissimilar to those of the Precursors. At the peak of their power, they would lose it all. The nanites they created went rogue, and it was only by chance that the Decinu were able to contain them within the L Cluster. The nanites would live within the L Cluster for several million years, develop a society of their own, try different methods of life, from replicating their creators down to the individual. They would pretend to be dragons, and eventually they would go on to form a single nanite individual, who would call itself Grey. A word of warning though, open the L Gates with caution, for if you catch the nanites in a bad mood, the Grey Tempest will come for you. And finally, this report would not be complete without touching how we, humanity, made it onto the galactic stage. Earth, in the mid-21st century, came together to create the Ulysses Initiative. The project would be to date the greatest undertaking by humanity. 6 wondrous arc ships were built in low Earth orbit over 50 years, and they would go on to house 250,000 colonists each, men and women who volunteered to explore the stars. Alpha Centauri was the target destination. All 6 ships would travel together, and the journey was estimated to take approximately 108 years. As such, the crew and colonists would be put into cryostasis for the duration. It is from these ships from which we, the Commonwealth of Man, was born. However, humanity never reached Alpha Centauri. As we passed into the Oort cloud at the edge of the solar system, we hit some sort of space-time anomaly, possibly a wormhole that would forever change our fate. The wormhole, if that is indeed what it was, spat us out into the system that we now call Deneb. Unity, as it would come to be called, was to be the home of the Commonwealth, but it would take years of blood and sweat to build these foundations. A primitive reptilian species occupied the planet and attempted to annihilate the survivors of the crash. As you well know, humanity prevailed, purging the aliens and claiming the planet for themselves. Within 20 Terran years, the sole sapient species on Unity was human. Back on Earth, however, the fate of the 6 arc ships remained uncertain. It was widely reported that all had been destroyed when they did not reappear from the Oort cloud at the edge of the system. What was supposed to be humanity's greatest achievement and represented a coming together between individual nation-states, sadly turned sour. The next 50 years of history for humans living on Earth would prove to be most difficult indeed, but war was somehow avoided. The UN began to gradually regain support and slowly expanded until, by the start of the 22nd century, the international organization known as the UN had become a de facto world government. The next 100 years or so were the absolute peak of human advancement. Space travel was still the ultimate goal, and the tragedy of the Ulysses Initiative was put to one side. Throughout the 22nd century, humanity began to explore its own solar system, building observational posts and mining facilities over Mars, Venus, and a number of Jupiter's moons. Though there were some who resented the power the UN wielded, as evidenced by the Mauritanian police action of '88, few could deny the technological progression, and perhaps more importantly, humanity was beginning to view itself as just that, humanity. Instead of individual nationalistic states, it had taken millennia, but humanity was about to finally put aside its differences and reach for a greater ideal. And thus, the UNE was formed, and the second human faction would take its place on the galactic stage. So my lords, that concludes my introduction to Stellaris lore. If you enjoyed this and want more detailed reports on some of the topics I covered, then I encourage you to search for the topic that interests you the most. I've covered everything discussed today in significant detail over the years. Of course, if you just want to hear more from me, then please click the video on screen now.